Welcome, everyone. I'm Nan McDonald. I'm Chief of Data Operations for the Institute for AI and Medicine. I want to welcome you to our last AI Health Forum for this year, this school year. So we're really pleased today to have Harry Surden. I do want to let you guys know that we will be restarting this series at the beginning of the school year. So keep an eye out for that. I'm going to turn it over right now to David to introduce Harry.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session this morning. It's really my distinct pleasure to be able to introduce our esteemed speaker today. Harry Surden is a professor of law at the University of Colorado, where he is also the faculty director of the Silicon Flatirons Center Artificial Intelligence Initiative. Outside of Colorado, Professor Surden is also associate director of Stanford University's Codex Center for Legal Informatics. Professor Surden is one of the leading scholars of artificial intelligence and law and is the creator of computable contracts. His articles, Structural Rights and Privacy, Machine Learning in Law, and Artificial in Law, and Overview have been widely cited. Professor Surden has a background both in computer science and law. Prior to entering academia, Professor Surden worked as a professional software engineer at Cisco Systems and Bloomberg LP. He's a graduate of Stanford University Law School and Cornell University, both with honors. So you're definitely in for a treat today with both the kind of academic perspective and then bringing it to the majority of users of large language models to really have a working framework. So without further ado, welcome, Harry, for today's talk.
Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be there here and virtually. And thank you, David, for that kind introduction. As David said, just a little bit of introduction that professor of law at the University of Colorado, and my research is in artificial intelligence and law. I have a background in both computer science and law, and a lot of my work is in explaining some of the advances of artificial intelligence to audiences who may not have some familiarity with the underlying technology. So that's what I'm going to try and do today. I'm going to try and convey some of the underlying intuitions about how the big changes in artificial intelligence in the last couple of years, what's going on there. We've all heard this in the news about ChatGPT. We're going to learn why people are excited about it, why it's different than some of the other artificial intelligence approaches of the past. And then we'll look at some potential applications in medicine. As a caveat, I am not a doctor and I don't have medical training. So I'll be discussing by analogy to where I do have training in law. So let's just start out by talking about the basic issues. What is ChatGPT and why are people excited about it? Most people have probably used ChatGPT, but for those who have not, ChatGPT is a text-based or chat-based interface to an actual underlying technology known as GPT, which I'll explain in a little bit. But just to show you an example of how ChatGPT works and why it's much better than previous technologies, let's see a simple example in medicine. So this is an example where we're typing in what's known as a prompt to ChatGPT, and this is GPT-4, which is currently the most capable AI model from OpenAI, the company that makes ChatGPT. And here I'm basically giving a set of symptoms to ChatGPT and telling it in the prompt to act as a doctor to see if it can diagnose it. And sure enough, with the caveat that it's not a medical professional, it gives a solid diagnosis. So I got this actually from a medical book to test it, and this is apparently the right answer according to the medical book based upon the assistant or a highly likely diagnosis, with again the caveat that I am not a doctor. But what's amazing about this is, you might sort of take this for granted and think, of course, AI could always do this, but that is not the case. It's really the changes in the last 2 years, from 2022 to 2024, that have really amazed people. So roughly speaking, prior to 2022, AI systems could not even come close to this level of analysis and knowledge work in areas such as medicine, law, engineering, and a whole host of other areas. So part of the talk is to emphasize the really important and dramatic changes that have happened in AI in just the last 2 years that have enabled abilities like this in many fields, including medicine. And the most important emphasis I want to talk about is in just 1 year, there was a giant leap in capability from 2022 to 2023 that has started kind of the era that we're on right now in AI. I want to emphasize what happened in that year as well. So to really get started, I think it's helpful to step back and try and understand this technology, understand a lot of the terminology. There's a lot of jargon, AI, GPT, large language models, try and make sense of all that, and then kind of dive a little deeper into the underlying landscape. And then in doing so, once we understand the underlying technology, I want to explore its capabilities within medicine. AI has always been used in medicine, or not always, but for the last 30 years or so. But I want to emphasize what the sort of knowledge-based ability, how it's different, and kind of the benefits and also risks it brings. So let's just start out with doing an overview of artificial intelligence and GPT and kind of getting the basics on the table. And I hope to bring most of you up to speed with the underlying intuitions of what's going on. So if we, so art, excuse me for 1 second. So artificial intelligence is there's no one satisfactory definition of artificial intelligence that everyone will agree to. But one useful definition that I like to use is using computers to solve problems, make predictions, answer questions, generate creative output, or make automated decisions or actions on tasks that, when done by people, typically require intelligence. So this definition is focused on the type of tasks that people do that we normally associate with intelligence. So these can be things like playing chess. When we talk about playing chess, when humans do it, we normally associate it with planning, reasoning, visual, spatial abilities. Similarly, writing articles or listening or creating audio or text. These are associated with linguistic abilities. So all of these are activities that when done by humans are generally thought of as involving human level intelligence. Now, intelligence itself is a word that with no satisfactory definition, but one useful definition there is higher order cognitive skills such as abstract reasoning, problem solving, learning, visual processing, language, etc. So putting these two together, artificial intelligence is taking some task that when humans do it, we normally associate it with intelligence, some higher order cognitive skills such as language processing, language generation, reasoning, and then we have a computer do it. We call that an artificial intelligence task. Now, to be clear, there are a couple caveats here. The first is computers do these tasks very differently than humans do, even though they're doing the same task. So when a computer plays chess, it does it in a very different way than a human does, even though it might ultimately be arriving at the same or better goal. So that's an important idea that computers solve these tasks very differently than the way human brains are thought to act. And the other thing is we want to avoid anthropomorphizing or humanizing these systems. They're often able to simulate or produce human-like outputs in text generation or reasoning, but very often at its core, it's just very advanced pattern matching and doesn't necessarily reflect the higher order cognitive abilities that we associate with human consciousness. So let's put that on the side that the computers are getting to similar results through very different artificial pathways. That being said, artificial intelligence is extremely useful. So here's an example from my area, law, a merger agreement. This is a standard contract between two big companies. Such an agreement, often will take lawyers hours, if not days, to draft up. And with GPT-4 here, you can ask it to write a merger agreement, and it can put out a pretty good first draft. I've been teaching this for a long time, and I rate the quality of the draft as something that you would get from a first-year associate at a law firm. So not your best partner or not your best lawyer, but something at the level of a new associate. This is something that you would have to, as a senior lawyer, check over, look for errors. You wouldn't want to ever turn it directly into a client or a court. On the other hand, this is incredibly useful because it gives you a first draft, and this is something that the AI couldn't do. So this is an example of artificial intelligence. When a lawyer drafts a legal agreement, he or she is thought to use higher order cognitive skills such as linguistic processing, planning, reasoning. So if we have GPT-4 do the same or similar task, even though it does it differently, that's an example of an artificial intelligence task that I said. So how did we get here with AI? I've stated that 3 years ago, we couldn't do anything remotely close to this. So let's just, step back and look at a different way of thinking about artificial intelligence. So previously, I talked about artificial intelligence in terms of thinking about the types of tasks involving human intelligence that can or cannot be automated. Now I want to talk about AI as different approaches to creating these AI systems. So in computer science, we can roughly think of AI has been involved in kind of two major, somewhat different approaches. One called machine learning, and a different one called symbolic AI or knowledge representation. So let me just talk about the difference between the two. And I'll talk about the bottom first. So symbolic AI is the idea, and it came out of the early days of artificial intelligence. That's the idea of taking expert knowledge about the world and then manually encoding it through programming into computer rules that the computer can reason on. So, for example, in medicine for a long time, and these systems have been very effective, we have things called expert systems. These are often built with engineers and doctors and scientists working together to kind of figure out various rules about diseases and symptoms or interactions between drugs. They encode these in a series of handwritten rules, and then the computer takes these expert rules and can give doctors and others really useful information about diagnosis or drug interactions or things of that nature. And we'll see much of the way computers are programmed these days are still in this symbolic AI knowledge representation mode, where computer scientists are looking around the world, often working with domain experts and attempting to encode knowledge either in programming language like Python or trying to model various aspects of the world manually. So for many years, this was the dominant paradigm. Around the 1990s and 2000, a completely different paradigm came about, known as machine learning. And machine learning, roughly speaking, just says, let's find these computer systems that are really good at noticing patterns. Let's give them huge amounts of data, unbelievably large amounts of data. And instead of manually encoding rules, let's let the pattern matchers just figure it out for themselves in the data. So this has become the dominant mode of AI since about 2000. It's what underlies the modern revolution in AI, like ChatGPT. So this I want to focus on more. But we've all seen these areas in our daily lives. For example, in email spam detection, nobody has manually hard-coded rules that say things like, if I see a word like win a prize, that's more likely spam. Rather, we use this machine learning algorithm, which after seeing multiple users hit the spam button over and over, it learns to notice patterns such that win a prize or free cash. These are phrases that are statistically more likely associated with spam. So here, this machine learning has learned that rule or those kind of probabilistic rules on its own. So if we see this sort of timeline of artificial intelligence, AI started in the early 50s. It was dominated by this symbolic approach for many, many years. Starting in the 1990s, machine learning came around, but it was very limited for a couple of reasons. First of all, the internet was just starting to come about, so much of the data was not in digital form that could be processed. Also, computers were still much slower back then, but they were starting to become good enough that people thought that having machines analyze patterns could be useful. But up until about 2010, machine AI was machine learning was useful for particular tasks such as classifying images, or maybe in the medical domain it might be able to recognize some sort of X-ray as possibly having some diagnosis or another, but it was pretty limited and didn't involve knowledge work. So this era lasted till about 2010. Then something interesting started happening in 2011. This old technology from the 1950s and 60s called neural networks, which was kind of had been abandoned, got revived. And basically, neural networks, as we'll see, are just extremely effective machine learning pattern matchers. It's just a way of doing machine learning in a way that's unusually effective. And what happened in 2011 is they took this old neural network technology, and thanks to advances in hardware and some technical advances, they started making these neural networks really big. And this brought up the era of what's known as deep learning, where big neural networks started to dominate machine learning. And there are all these other approaches to machine learning, but they've sort of mostly gone away because these neural networks became extremely effective, much more effective at lots of other tasks. And then the modern era where we are started in 2022. And this is when they had, in the earlier era, they had built what are known as language models, which attempted to generate text, and they just weren't very good. But what started happening in 2022 is these machine learning models started to get really good. So that's where we're going to focus on. These AI large language models that could deal with knowledge and text started to become useful, whereas previously they were kind of interesting but not applicable and useful. So if we want to kind of situate ourselves where we are, looking at this graph of techniques of AI, on the left we have machine learning techniques. I won't go into those details, but I'm just trying to show you that there's a bunch of techniques that people use to detect patterns in data, and those have been pretty useful on the left. On the right, there's a bunch of techniques of symbolic or rules-based AI where experts can hand code rules. So right now we're kind of in the left under the area called neural networks. And if we zoom in, the area that we're most focused on is this area of neural networks called deep learning, which are essentially very large neural networks. And that has brought us to the moment of GPT. We're using these very large neural networks. And let's think a little bit about GPT. The best way to understand GPT, I believe, is by looking at the letters that form the acronyms. So if we talk about Chat GPT, the GPT is actually an acronym for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And we're going to go through each one of those words and kind of understand what those mean. And that will help us understand how this AI systems work, like ChatGPT, and how they're different from other previous eras. So if we look at, let's start with the word G, generative. So generative refers to using AI systems to generate things usually associated with human creativity. So generating text, generating images, generating music, or audio or language. And the reason we emphasize this is that AI is used for lots of other things that are different and do not generate things. So we all heard of AI self-driving cars. There, the AI system's not generating things; it's just making decisions about driving. Or we have AI playing chess. There, it's making decisions about what chess move to do, or maybe a diagnosis. It's kind of deciding the probability of a diagnosis. Here we have a kind of new style of system from about 2016 on, where AI systems are able to generate things. So ChatGPT is in the generative area because it's able to generate text. So one we've all seen, and this is also very recent, generative art. So here I asked Midjourney, which is one of the best generative art systems, to create an image of the Mona Lisa in the style of Pixar. And as you can see, it's able to do this in 30 seconds. So this is this new technology that was only developed alongside in the last few years using the same technology that has enabled GPT. So GPT is in the same family of generative AI because it generates text. And we will see, interestingly, it generates text one word at a time. So when it appears to be answering a question that you're asking, it's actually behind the scenes not really answering the question. What it's doing is looking at your prompt and based upon your prompt, predicting the next word. So if you ask it, what is the capital of Paris? It is generating one word at a time. The most likely word, it might say, sorry, the capital of France. It might say the capital of France is Paris. The capital of France is Paris. One word at a time. But it does it so quickly, it looks like it's answering your question rather than predicting one word at a time. So that's the G part of GPT. It's in the era of generating things. GPT is generating text, and to a lesser degree, these days, it can also generate images. The P part of GPT is really important, and that stands for pre-trained. So pre-training is the idea of taking these large deep learning neural network systems, these pattern matching systems, and just releasing them on huge amounts of text, most of the internet, for example. And this was thought to be hard to do, but the idea was maybe if we release it on the internet, it can learn the patterns of language. It might learn, for example, after reading the Wikipedia page for, the capital of France is, and then you blank out the next word, it might be able to learn to predict that the next word is Paris. So that's what they tried to do, and it turns out it works fantastically well. By releasing these pattern matching systems on billions or trillions of words, it starts to learn a lot of things. It learns the way language works, the common aspects of language, how to write fluent sentences. It also encodes facts about the world by seeing it over and over again. It learns how to reason, learns all these amazing things just by seeing patterns over and over again in huge amounts of text. So this idea of releasing these pattern matching systems on huge amounts of text is known as pre-training. And you might have heard the word large language model. These are so-called large language models because for two reasons. First, these deep learning systems used to be smaller, only in the order of millions of pattern matchers. We call these pattern matching numbers internally parameters. Recently, they've gotten very big in the order of billions or trillions. So the more numbers you have to match patterns, to detect patterns, the better your system is. So something like GPT-4 has a trillion numbers to match patterns, such as colors or capitals or learning different languages or reasoning. All of those patterns it can pick up in Wikipedia or research articles or newspaper articles. So that's one reason these things are large. They're also trained on large amounts of text, billions or trillions of web pages or books or articles. So together we call these large language models because they're so big in the number of parameters or pattern matchers that they have and the number of texts that they've been trained on. So you might hear this word LLM. So GPT is an example, GPT-4 is an example of a large language model, a very big one of these pattern matchers. So that's the P part in GPT, pre-training, taking these pattern matching, releasing it on large amounts of text, and having it learn those patterns. That process is called pre-training. Finally, we're at a really crucial part, the T part, transformer. So the transformer is a particular way of doing neural networks that was invented by Google in 2017 in a famous paper called Attention is All You Need. And this invention was incredible because it solved two big problems that had previously held back the AI research. The most important thing it did was allow these large language model systems to look at the context of what is being asked. And we'll look at that in a second. But the general idea is prior to, say, 2022 or 2017, if you had asked an AI system, you typed in, what is the capital of France? It couldn't easily look around at all the different words like France and capital to get a hint about what you were asking it. So when you ask a human a question like, what is the capital of France? We look at the context of the words, the different words in the sentence that are kind of hinting at what the person is asking. And previous systems couldn't easily look around at the different context words to know what was being asked. So these systems were much worse. And to the extent they could, they were just impossibly slow. So the transformer architecture allowed these systems to look around at the context words to figure out kinds of questions or instructions they were being asked. And that dramatically improved the efficacy of this. So that's basically what the transformer does, and we'll actually see it in detail in a moment. But it turns out that understanding the different context of the words that are being asked, like a human does, dramatically increases the ability of these systems to answer and make sense. The other thing that Transformer did was the architecture allowed it to process huge amounts of text in parallel. So prior to 2017, I told you about the pre-training where we released these systems on trillions of words. You couldn't do that with the previous systems because they could only do it sequentially, and it was just too slow. So Google figured out a way to kind of do this in parallel, which allowed us to suddenly look at billions or trillions of words instead of thousands or hundreds of thousands. And it turned out that that was one of the big changes, kind of allowing these things to get scaled up very large. So just taking a step back here, we have where ChatGPT or GPT is. We're within artificial intelligence. Of course, within artificial intelligence, we're looking at machine learning, which is looking at different patterns rather than manually encoding rules. We're looking at neural networks, which is a specific way of doing machine learning. There are other techniques out there, but neural networks has dominated. We're looking at deep learning, which is the idea of taking neural networks and making them really big as opposed to small neural networks. And then finally, we're looking at the transformer architecture, which is just one way of doing deep learning invented by Google, which allows these systems to look around at context and understand what is being asked. So now, before we get into the technicalities of this, let's talk a little bit about GPT history. So ChatGPT is the real big deal I want to emphasize because it's what started this modern revolution in 2022. There were previous large language models before that, but they just were simply not that good, not that generally useful. So as most of us know, ChatGPT was developed by formerly a nonprofit research institute, now a for-profit company called OpenAI. And what they did was they took Google's transformer architecture, which Google made free and open to the world, and made several crucial improvements, engineering improvements, and they made their own inventions to make it a just much more effective, more general system than even Google or anybody else had done. So OpenAI started out in 2018 developing one of these systems called GPT-1. It wasn't very good. It couldn't really do reasoning or anything interesting. Same with GPT-2. It kind of, these GPT-2, it made these large language models seem a little bit of a dead end because these things were not that effective. But OpenAI persisted. And finally, GPT-3 in 2020 was the first hint that these large language model systems might be the new future of AI. GPT-3 was released in 2020, was very good at generating human-like text. It could write poems, things of that nature. But notably, it didn't look like general purpose AI. You couldn't ask it questions, it couldn't do reasoning. So what was interesting about it was that it could produce lifelike articles or things of that nature, but it couldn't do anything more general. So most of the people at the time just thought it was a really interesting kind of text generator. Some people called it stochastic parrots, but it really didn't look like what most of us would consider a general purpose kind of question answering analysis service. The big deal was ChatGPT released in November 2022, which exhibited a huge leap in capabilities from the systems just in earlier 2022. So ChatGPT, also known as GPT 3.5, is the free version that most of us have used who are not using the most advanced paid version. The big deal today is GPT-4, which was released around a year ago in March 2023. It's improved steadily, so the same GPT-4 that we see today is much better than the GPT-4 from a year ago. And GPT-4 is currently the state of the art. So if you've not played with the most advanced system, make sure you reserve judgment if your interaction is only based upon the free version, GPT 3.5, because GPT-4 is vastly more capable than GPT 3.5. OpenAI is going to be releasing actually its most capable version for free in a model called GPT-4o very shortly. So everybody will have access to the highly capable version in the coming weeks, which is very interesting. What I want to emphasize is the big change that happened from 2022, early 2022 to late 2022. As I mentioned, the early GPT-3 was released in 2020, was good at generating text, but it wasn't really advanced AI. And what's important to understand, and we can understand this big change by looking at the models that existed, the large language models in early 2022, which are still online, and we can use them like a living museum to see how big a leap we had from January of 2022 to November of 2022. So I've been testing these systems for years, and I would ask them common sense questions just to see if there was anything remotely approaching AI systems in these large language models. And these are kind of common sense questions that a toddler would get right, but these systems consistently got wrong. So here I asked kind of a nonsense question: how many legs does an apple have? And the reason I asked this question is that you want it to be common sense enough that even a human little kid would get it right, but also something that's unlikely to have been answered by a person previously in its training data. So it's unlikely that somebody had written a Wikipedia page saying that apples don't have legs, so it can't just be copying the answer. So the previous system, this is the system from January 2022, would very confidently give you kind of a nonsense answer. So here's another example of doing diagnosis of medicine. I gave it the same with some of the earlier questions to the earlier system, and it would just give nonsense. So these early systems from January 2022 just didn't seem like AI. They weren't that interesting. These kind of general AI systems seemed far off. So I like to say these older systems did not exactly appear to be a shining beacon of medical intellect. The big precipitating change was ChatGPT in November 2022, which surprised everybody because it was suddenly able to reason and problem solve. So this was an emergent ability. It was not expected at all. So these systems had not been trained to problem solve. They'd not been trained to reason, yet they exhibited a limited reasoning and emergent properties of problem solving. The other thing that was amazing was that GPT 3.5 can now was able to answer just about anything you asked it, albeit not necessarily accurately, but it could answer things in a pertinent way. So this was the big limitation holding up these large language models prior to 2022 was the idea was the fact that you could ask them stuff and more, a large percent of the time they would just give you nonsense rather than something coherent. ChatGPT was the first system to give you at least a pertinent and relevant and coherent answer to just about anything you asked, even if it wasn't entirely accurate. But just getting it to respond coherently was kind of the huge barrier. Accuracy was, kind of a far distant dream. So this was kind of an amazing feat for GPT 3.5, but it really suffered in accuracy and its reasoning abilities were limited, but it was still amazing. And then GPT-4 was suddenly released just a few months later, and it surpassed GPT 3.5 in every measure in terms of reasoning, accuracy, etc. So, we went from basically in a very short amount of time, in just 1 year of having these systems that would, answer nonsense to things that could plausibly give you analysis and reasoning in just about any area of knowledge. So that's the big deal I want to emphasize is that these systems, these AI systems of today, these large language models deal with language, and language is the foundation of a lot of society. It's how we encode information, it's how we communicate with each other, it's how we solve problems. And if you could get an AI system that effectively works with language, you can get a more general AI system that can work across different domains. It can work in law, business, engineering, medicine, etc. And prior to 2022, these systems were narrow. They were very good at very one little specific task, but they didn't have this general knowledge and reasoning capability. So that's the huge change that happened. We went from systems like this that would kind of give you gibberish when you ask them things like that. This is GPT-3 from early 2022 to a system. This is GPT-4 giving the same set of symptoms, asking it for a diagnosis in just 1 year. And it's able to give quite a good diagnosis, which, caveat aside, this is according to a medical textbook I looked at. This is a very good answer. We went from having models that told you in early 2022 that an apple has 6 legs to a model in 2024 that can not only tell you that an apple is a fruit, it doesn't have legs, it's exhibiting common sense reasoning, but can do all sorts of problem solving and theory of mind and reasoning. So this is really kind of incredible stuff that's going on. It's just a huge leaping capability. And we're running low on time, but I want to give you a little bit of an intuition about how GPT works. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I want you to get an intuition to how these large language models work. They're just generating one word at a time, yet they're able to do reasoning and analysis and answer questions and follow instructions. And this is just incredible. And beneath the hood, there's a series of inventions that I want to emphasize that allowed this to happen. And I won't go to all of this, but I'm just going to emphasize the most important aspects to help you understand how it is that these AI systems can reason with language when prior to 2022 they couldn't do this effectively. So I'd say one of the key inventions to these large language model systems, allowing them to work with knowledge and text, is something called word embeddings or word invectors. And this is the idea that you can actually represent the meaning of words using numbers. So prior to, this was invented in 2013, also by Google. So Google invented this idea. They also invented the transformer and improved upon by Stanford. But this was the idea that it was thought previously that there was no way you could reasonably encode the meaning of various words using numbers. But they can't. Google came up with this technique called word vectors, and the intuition behind it, I want to show you here, is to think of this in the following way. So imagine we had every word in the English language on a giant spreadsheet. So we had dog, cat, bird, house, etc., all the way down to, zebra, tree, what have you. 50,000, say, 250,000 words. And then across each column, we had every possible category that you could categorize a thing. So, for example, whether a thing like a tree or house or a dog is or is not a pet. And then you could sort of score it very high if this thing was that category. So, for example, a dog is a pet, so this is from 1 to -1, so it gets a very high score of 0.1, but a dog is not a building, so it gets a score of -0.9. By contrast, a house is not a pet, a house doesn't have fur, but a house is a building, so it gets a high score. So this isn't exactly how it works in GPT, but it doesn't work like this because they don't have these neat categories like pet, fur, building, but it's roughly intuitively how it works. So as GPT goes through pre-training, it starts categorizing every word in the English language into these categories, kind of bumping them up if it's, it does this automatically through training, whether things are, dogs and cats are pets, and the way it does this is because it sees a lot of words in similar context on Wikipedia pages. So you might see dogs and cats talked about very, very similarly on web pages and blog posts and things like that on Reddit. So you might say, I took my blank to the vet. I took my pet cat to the vet, and I took my pet dog to the vet. And in seeing phrases like this over and over again, it soon automatically learns that dogs and cats are kind of similar to each other in the pet category. And it turns out if you do this over and over again, billions of times, it starts to learn these what they call semantic representations of words. It's word meanings where similar words are grouped together by different categories automatically. So houses and office buildings get grouped together under the building category, and dogs and cats get grouped together under the pet category and the fur category. And this is just kind of an amazing thing. And they're in modern systems, they don't just have, 5 categories, they have something like 12,000 or 20,000 categories. And these categories, again, are only interpretable to the system. They don't have these sort of neat column names. So that was a huge, huge breakthrough. It really underlies how GPT-4 works. GPT-4 and these large language model systems represent every word like these word vectors. They automatically classify them, and that gives GPT a really rich understanding of all the things that when you use the word bird or cat or building or tree, that a tree is a plant and it has leaves and things of that nature. We already talked about neural networks. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but they're usually visualized like this. And these are these deep pattern detection systems and they're trained through pre-training by trying to predict the next word. So here, the system predicted that the next word, given the cat sat on the blank, it predicted that mat is the most likely word. And the reason it predicted that is because it's seen this phrase written many, many times. So for example, so this is one of the key ideas for how learning happens during pre-training. So remember I said in pre-training, we take these pattern matching systems, we release them on Wikipedia, large parts of the internet. How does it actually learn this? So I'm going to give you an intuition here. So say there's a blog page that says the cat sat on the mat. What we'll do to train this system, and let's imagine we have GPT-4, it doesn't know English, it doesn't know language patterns, it doesn't know any interesting things. It starts out kind of like a blank slate. What we do is we blank out the word mat, the cat, and we ask it to try and just make its best guess what the prediction is. And what we have here, see this number, these are the parameters. These are the weights these are the pattern matchers that guide based upon the prompt the cat sat on. We try and have it predict the most likely next word. And we have the list of all the most, say 50,000 most common words in the English language. And it's going to try and predict the most likely next word based upon the previous words. So let's imagine it doesn't know anything. And this is during training. You give it the cat sat on the, and it does a bad job. It predicts banana. And the reason it predicts that, or it could predict any other random word like tree or house, because it doesn't know anything. It hasn't learned these patterns. So this is where the learning comes in. We have to train it next time to be more likely to predict mat, the right answer, rather than banana. And the reason we know that the right answer is mat is because we can look at the sentence on the blog and see that the right answer was mat. We had just blanked it out and hadn't told it. So now we can tell GPT, go look internally and figure out which of these parameters steered you towards predicting banana. And I want you to lower those numbers, make them lower because they gave you the wrong answer. So it's going to go back and lower that 8 and make that a negative. And then it says, now look internally and figure out which one of those parameters would have made you choose mat, and I want you to promote it. So now if you see these numbers have changed, now it's more likely to go down this path and come to predict mat. So that's an example of learning. Previously, these numbers were wrong. It was steering it down the wrong path. But now that we've said, hey, you can readjust your internal parameters to promote the ones that would have given you the right answer and demote the ones that would have given you the wrong answer, now you're incrementally more likely to choose mat instead of banana the next time. So that's the key idea about how these things learn. You do this over and over again. Every time it gets a wrong answer, you have it demote the internal parameters of its billions that would have led it to the wrong answer. You figure out which of the ones would have given you the right answer. You do it over and over again. For the capital of France is blank. It might say London. Demote those. The ones that would have chosen Paris, you promote those over and over again. And then this training process, can take months. It costs billions of dollars because it's very computationally expensive. The final technical thing I want to just briefly give you an intuition about is the transformer. This is the invention by Google. And this is the thing that allowed these systems to learn to look around at the context of what was being asked to figure out kind of the contextual meaning and to give more relevant, useful answers. So let's take a word like crane. It has at least two different meanings. Crane as a bird a crane as a construction machine. And if you remember our word embeddings from before, we'll have a word like crane. It'll be categorized in along, say, 12,000 different categories. And in those word embed, it's learned the meaning of the word crane from reading billions of pages. So which is the representation that is the right one? Is it the bird or is it the construction equipment? And the answer is it's kind of both. So these systems learn kind of a mixed meaning that's, let's just say roughly half bird, half machine. So how does somebody know to treat it like a bird or a machine? Well, the way humans do is they listen to the context of the sentence. So if you see a sentence, if somebody asks you, something about a wetland and flying, you're going to understand that it's the crane, the bird version of crane they're talking about. GPT-4, the transformer, is what allows GPT-4 to do the same thing. So what it does is when it sees words like bird and fish and wetland, it mathematically nudges the word crane in the direction of bird. And this is one of the crucial inventions of the transformer. It now allows the GPT-4 to understand mathematically that you're not just talking about a crane, you're talking about the bird version of crane, which is amazing. By contrast, if you had asked it, you had words about construction site and other things in the context, it can nudge it mathematically in the direction of the machine. Again, the way humans do. So this was a huge invention that allowed GPT-4 to be as effective as it is. Let me just finish here by showing a few GPT-4 experiments in medicine, and then show where we're going in the future. So I don't necessarily recommend this, and again, I'm not a doctor. I'm just showing you that GPT-4 and these advanced systems have the capability of, for example, you give them a list of symptoms and tell it it's a doctor, and it can give you what the medical textbook tells me are pretty good plausible interpretations of this. These things are only likely to get better. They do make mistakes, as I will emphasize, but the point being that these old systems couldn't do this. So 2 years ago, you could not, for example, give such a system a list of symptoms in free-form text and have it give you anything reliable. Another thing you can do, this is a very reliable use of GPT-4. This is Bing Chat, which uses GPT-4 on the back end, also known as Copilot. You can have it summarize journal articles, and it's very reliable at doing this. You can ask it questions, help you explain, understand things in medicine, etc. This I actually recommend. A very good use of GPT-4 today is having it explain articles, research articles that you don't understand. I use it every day in that matter, in that context. Okay, so let me finish up to figure out with some of the limitations on GPT-4 and then where we're going. Most of us have heard of hallucinations. This is where GPT-4 and other large language models just make up plausible seeming facts. So this is a problem. This is why I tell you, you would not want to turn in a merger agreement written by GPT-4 directly to a client or a judge, the same way you would not want a first-year law student a draft that they wrote. You'd want to really double check it for accuracy. However, these things are getting better. I don't think the hallucinations are going to completely go away, but they're definitely being reduced to the point where they're much less of a worry than they were a year ago. Other things to look out for, sometimes the reasoning is not totally right. They do common sense errors. The information can now be out of date. Of course, there may be biases in the training data, lack of transparency or interpretability. These are all things I'm happy to talk about in the Q&A. Again, I don't necessarily recommend that doctors do what I'm showing you. I'm just showing you potential experimental capabilities, not recommendations for med students or doctors to be doing. All right, so where are we today and where are we going? Today we have some competitors to GPT-4. There's Claude 3 Opus from Anthropic. There's Gemini Ultra and Pro from Google. So now there are 3 GPT-4 class models. Apparently GPT-5, although it's a secret, the next generation is in training and should be out from OpenAI in the next 3 to 6 months. Meta has a bunch of open source models. They just released Llama 3. They have a really advanced model called Llama 3 400B that's currently in training. Those are really interesting and exciting. And in the next year, next 2 years, I try not to predict more than 2 years out because it's very unreliable. And I caution you not to listen to people who try and predict for much longer time horizons than that. But what I think we're going to see in the coming years are larger large language models. So what the science has shown is that these systems get better as you make them bigger and give them more computation. So the first GPT 3.5 was about 175 billion parameters. GPT-4 was about 10 times bigger at 1 trillion parameters. We expect GPT-5 and others to be on the order of 10 trillion parameters. And as these things get bigger, they exhibit more emergent properties, better reasoning, ability to code, things of that nature. So I expect that to continue. Other things we're coming to see are improvements in data set quality. The original GPT was trained on the entire internet. The internet has a lot of junk. They figured out that if you train on high quality materials, maybe medical textbooks, as opposed to somebody's blog post or a Reddit comment, you get higher quality outputs. We're seeing faster hardware. A big thing we're going to start seeing are AI agents, where you're sending the AI system out with a goal, and it takes some time, whether it's 30 seconds or a minute, and it's going to do some things on its own before coming back to you immediately. So what you're trading off is immediacy of response for more reliability and more sophisticated autonomy. All right. And also, we're going to see a lot more reduction in hallucinations because they're improving those technologies. So let me just stop there because I want to take time for questions, and I've talked quite a lot, and I want to hear what everyone has to say. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Harry. And this recording will be available as well, so people can go back and review all the important context setting that Harry provided, so you can have a framework for looking at this exciting new technology. And just a couple questions from our group. One is, what impact do you see this having on the labor market
Ah,
and field?
This is a great question. So I'm actually writing a paper on this right now in law. So what I want to caution you is don't trust our intuition as to what's going to happen on the labor market because it's a lot more complicated than what our intuition often tells us. So when I talk to many people about this, their intuition is that AI will either get rid of all knowledge jobs or will substitute jobs. And that's not clear that's what always happens. So in terms of getting rid of there's this idea that if AI does knowledge work, it's likely to get rid of jobs generally, and then what will people do? This is kind of a well-studied phenomenon in economics called the lump of labor fallacy. And jobs don't go away because humans find new ways to create jobs generally. So jobs change and different types of jobs often will go away. But, if, they sort of made a lot of these arguments with the mechanization of society. In 1900, 40% of jobs were in agriculture. Now it's 3%, but unemployment in the country is 4%. So new jobs have come to replace that. Now, that's not to say, however, we should be careful about substitution effects. So it's definitely the case that some people do have their jobs substituted away. And that's normally what we think of. That's what our intuition tells us is that happens to most people or all people. And that is likely to happen to some subset of jobs, and we definitely need to care about that. But what history has told us is that that's usually a small subset of jobs, and technology often substitutes for some tasks and it complements for other tasks, meaning it makes it more effective. And on net, technology like AI is as likely, if not more likely, to create new types of tasks and jobs and more jobs than it is to eliminate jobs overall. That being said, some people will have their jobs changed or eliminated and might not be able to uh, change, and we need to care about those people, and we have not done a good job of it. But I think in knowledge industries like law and medicine, doctors are not going away. If anything, it's likely to enhance doctors, create new types of jobs we've never heard about. That being said, doctoring and lawyering will be different. It will not be the same, which is different from saying that doctoring jobs will and lawyering jobs will go away.
Well, thank you so much, Harry. I know we're short on time, and we really appreciate you sharing this today with us. And let me transition over to Nan.
I just want to thank everybody for, and especially Harry, for making our last forum of the year so successful. And we will look forward to seeing you guys at the beginning of the school year for the next series.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye.